just going to talk very briefly, 15 minutes, really on a theme which seems to be cropping up left, right, and center, which is really digital transformation. And for us, I was looking the other day, I was talking to the guy who runs our sales side in the office, and he said to me, 95% of all the deals that are coming through, there's a degree of migration. It's not transformation, it's migration, because it's the precursor, if you like, to that step. So I thought I'd take you through some of the lessons we've seen, and actually a short case study on a company we know pretty well, which is ourselves, about how you adjusted it. And one of the key things is really how you think about not just the technology and whether I'm going to use this, that, or the other cloud, or how I think about it, but also your organization, right? How you structure yourself to think it through. Because in some regards, if you don't get that right, you're never going to get anything to work. Doesn't matter how slick your skills are, how slick your technology is. So very quickly, who are Interoute? For those who don't know, Interoute is now one of the largest independent IT service providers in Europe, 2,500 employees, 132 countries with service in, very much a European focus. We have two kind of ways of thinking about Interoute. One, we are the ground, if you like, below pretty much everybody in Europe, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, etc., Facebook. But also, we've built now 75% of our revenues comes from the enterprise, and we're one of the leaders in Europe in terms of things like cloud-enabled managed hosting. Fine set of customers, UEFA you will know, some of the others you won't know. We are big in paper manufacturing for some reason, purely topologically. It's more to do with that rather than we actually have any understanding of the process by which people make paper. So, digital transformation. I think one of the key things we've seen is, does it apply to you? Now, clearly, if you think about it in our world, there are two things to think about. There's to use that sort of Gartner-esque language, bimodal, the mode 1, mode 2. Those coming from somewhere and trying to transform their business, migrate their infrastructure, traditional enterprise, if you want to use that language. Or a digital business, those folks who are setting out to build a business. We have folks, I was talking yesterday, very interesting. One group, they do identity access management, SaaS-enabled, into some very large corporations. We give them the platform to do that. And they're talking about containerized platforms and how they think it through. On the other flip side of that, there's an organization, 10 data centers globally. How do I shift that infrastructure and think it through? So that's your mode 1 to mode 2 challenge. Not everybody needs to go digital. For those southwest of London, this is the Park Brewery. Very fine craft ale comes out of there, but probably doesn't get much further than 2 or 3 miles around. That is the brewery, by the way, and there's 2 guys who run it, and you can buy it. It's a stunningly good ale, but as I said, doesn't get very far. I don't think they're thinking of going digital. But conversely, customer of ours, Skabal, they make very fine cloth. Obama, Daniel Craig, they wear Skabal cloth. They have this process which we've worked with them on called sheep to shop, which is really the digitization of their process. Interestingly, they now have the capability to have a website. You can go on there, you can select your suit, you can do all your sizing and all that wonderful stuff. Click buy, and they'll deliver it to you. But if you're spending upwards of £5,000 on a suit, right, unless you really have got a serious amount of money, most people would like to go into a lovely Savile Row shop, sit down, have a cup of tea, have a chat with this bloke with a tape measure around his neck and his chalk and all that. So it's interesting when you think about the extent of digitization. Sat the other day with the CIO of a very large opticians, global opticians. He said, you know what, we don't really want too many people buying online because we make all the money from people coming into the shop. So you've got to think where your value is created, and that should drive the extent to which you think about digitization. But fundamentally, to do this, you need to have some kind of capability. Gartner, as they would always say, 3 different ways. One, you've got to have this bimodal capability. That's basically saying, how do I get from where I am to where I want to go? How do I have operational stability with something that allows me to be very agile and respond to the requirements of my organization? That in turn means you've got to have a different type of core. You've got to have a more flexible core. You've got to think about your infrastructure in a more flexible way. And of course, you've got to know what you want to do. That is what digital leadership is about. And I think one of the interesting things for us is we see this kind of mode 1, mode 2 thing going on all the time. It is a struggle because it's a challenge because you've got to go from something which is tried and trusted and locked down to something which can be a little bit looser, but a far more agile and more creative in how you think about it. And you end up with this kind of way of thinking about it. Application development, these are the guys, generally speaking, driving. Infrastructure and operations really are the guys who are saying, let's just take it a little bit, a little bit of caution. You have this wonderful wall of confusion, and then up here, you're talking really API and cloud, and here you're talking kind of networks and data centers. And never the twain shall meet. In our experience, and we sell into organizations where you clearly see this difference, ironically, we see more often than not, these guys understand some of the value that you see down here, whereas some of these folks down here are thinking, this just spells trouble up here, right? So you get this kind of organizational dichotomy, to use that sort of way of thinking about it. So when you think about it, you go cloud, and you think about how you build out your capability, and then you start augmenting it. The infrastructure and ops guys come in and say, well, let's just connect up this thing, get a little bit more assurance, a little bit more performance, a little more predictability, and you move forward. But one of the challenges as you're chasing this is that you are, at some level, releasing a whole bunch of silos, right? So you have different data sets sitting around. How are you going to pull those back in together? Again, it comes back to this idea of, I don't want to move from one siloed model, which is slow and hard to move to one agile model, which is creating more silos. You need to have a kind of completeness. And I don't think anyone is for a moment suggesting that there is a single solution that you should just plump all everything in. That would be way too risky, given that where we are in the kind of timeline of this transition. You want to keep your options open, keep your architecture open, so that as things improve, change, adapt, you can do that as well. Short case study, Interoute, right? I know it well because effectively we built it. Back in 2003, we had, for want of a better description, a very classical way of thinking about it. Lots of different platforms doing lots of different things, different bits of hardware, interconnected by networks, data centers, et cetera, et cetera. 2010, we started to collapse a lot of the hardware using the fact that the silicon was getting a little bit more faster. And 2012, we made the final push, which was really to flatten everything. Bear in mind, Interoute is what's called a facilities provider, i.e. we literally own the stuff in the ground and the buildings. So we light the fiber, we put a packet core on, and then we have what we call our common compute platform on top. Everything else went soft, and the core reason for that is it gives us this very flexible platform for developing services. Core platforms here, server-side API, and then we can create services using kind of a web service architecture, which in truth we've been developing since about 2005. The other benefit of this, it allows you to create, in our example, what we would call a digital platform, right? And the digital platform isn't distinctive to say it's cloud, because of course it's cloud, right? Because that's an agility, that's a more efficient way of consuming x86 resources and storage. It's also tying in the fact that most organizations, especially the ones we deal with, are geographically dispersed. And so you've got to tie in that domain in a way that makes sense. So you create this global network of compute resources. But through that level of automation, you control the ability to allow people to go online and create servers straight onto the platform. You're giving that agility. That is digitization of a service provider in a nutshell. So if we go back to the conversation I was talking to, digital transformation, you're trying to get this cloud flexibility, but you want some kind of operational scalability, security, and stability. And people can talk about it in different ways of doing it. And I think we are pragmatists. We are not idealists. We are not evangelists. We're not kind of religious about any of this. We're pragmatists. We think most things are done in life in the world we live in because it's, generally speaking, more cost efficient, more efficient in terms of process time, and more performant, right? Those are the criteria with which we would measure successful transformation. So if you look at the current approach, as I mentioned before, you end up with a model whereby you're trying to secure your capability in that way. And basically, our approach is very simple. You start with your organization. We've embedded, effectively, the compute into the digital platform itself, which gives you that surety across your organization, but also gives you access to your favorite public cloud, if that is you'll want. Interoute has worked an awful lot with Microsoft, especially on 365. The one thing Microsoft did, which was smart and had a lot of forethought, unlike I could mention another database manufacturer, it's quite well known, begins with O, is things like they have license portability. So if you want an enterprise cloud with Microsoft, your choices for how you manage that, normally the bugbear in these transformations and migrations is your Active Directory. How am I going to get that to work? Do I really want to push it out there, or do I want to secure it? These kind of things gives people quite a lot of choice, and we will take some of the core x86 loads and workloads into the platform. Obviously, Interoute, being very European, skips all the issues about where is your data, because it's in the country you want it in. But also, we give you that access to the compute side, and then obviously, Interoute's networking capabilities get you out wherever you may want to go. And you get this kind of balance. In terms of what you end up with is a platform that looks something like this, in terms of how you connect the whole thing up, and we give you end-to-end assurance. Just a couple of things in the 2 minutes and 24 seconds I have left. One of the things we do within that context is this thing called Interoute Connect, which really is really an addendum to some of the things that the folks at AWS and Equinix and Azure have done. Interoute obviously is a network, so we have lots of connections, always have had, 298 to be precise, in many, many countries in the world. The other thing we do on the back of this, which is something you get that stability, but then you get the creativity that comes from things like containerization. And one of the beautiful things about this is you start to enter a world whereby you stop thinking about virtual data centers or zones or availability zones and this sort of thing, which is really a sort of very short hop from the physical world of data centers and networks to the kind of world where we are today of cloud, right, if you like. And you start saying, well, hang on. I'm not really that bothered about the infrastructure at any level, right? I just need something very portable for my application to move around within. And you move to the other side, which is the sort of platform side of our business, and things like containers. And you can start to build some very powerful products. For example, this is a 9-node Mongo NoSQL capability, which uses the network and latency as a metric to know which region should be primary and which should be a secondary. And therefore, you end up with a very, very high level of availability. The point being, as you transition and migrate to the cloud, what we're urging and working with all our customers is doing is don't just simply lift and shift, right? There's a little transformation that goes on, just a little one, not massive, and say, well, hang on, I'm going to move from a disaster recovery model to an always-on model, right? Why? You're not penalized for doing it. It's a lot less hassle. You don't have the things about RTOs and RPOs and how the data replication and whether that's going to work with the level of transactional volumes that are coming through on a database. You're running in an always-on way. And I think you start to have a model, this is just a view into the platform itself, where you're building a cluster, and you're building a cluster across countries and continents. And you treat it at an application level like one big contiguous compute platform. And then you build availability on top. So you're moving to this idea that the digital platform, yes, has some sense of location, Madrid, Geneva, Zurich, et cetera, Why? Because the world we live in is dictated by the speed of light and the protocols that move it around, and that dictates at some level your experience. But also, the flip side of that is to say, well, hang on, I want that as a pool of compute, a pool of resourcing into which I can then just have my applications. And of course, the other benefit is that we can give you that kind of single tenancy privacy model, which means it can be a private backbone globally. So just to wrap up, if you're going to, from our perspective, what we've seen as we move through a lot of this with a lot of our customers is a responsive organization is very effective if they've got something they can be responsive with. You've got to get the organization working. In Interoute's case, how do we get the organization to come together? I literally sat them together, right? So you took, building digital platforms is a kind of like layering a cake. And the best way to do it is get all the layers to sit among each other. And get them to understand that what is amazingly valuable in their world, unfortunately, the upper layers tend to make obsolete pretty fast because they're looking for efficiency. So it's got to get that sort of, that transformation working there. For many, it's about migration, but migration is the first step in continual transformation. It's not a sort of, I'm going to shift everything to this platform and then I'm going to start my cloud thing, right? The way to think about it, the way we've seen it, is you're constantly adapting. You're constantly saying, well, actually, that's, we've got customers with AS400s, right? They ain't going in the cloud, right? They are rolled in a piece of co-location, but part of that domain. And the guy does, he said, we've had an AS400 for as long as I can remember. I ain't getting rid of it. That's, we have some fairly well-known consumer brands who use us. And if I told you, I won't mention their names, that the original engine was written in 2007, and, every summer they're going to rewrite it, right? But then every summer they run out of time, and then it's the Christmas season, and next year they're going to rewrite it. So the world we live in is not always going to be as, you can't re-architect everything in one big bang. It is a constant iteration, picking the things that matter and keep changing them. And in order to do that, you need to have an organization that can manage that kind of change and can go with it and adjust and believe and understand that things will change and the job they're doing today will change. And secondly, give them the capability to do it and how they can change it themselves. Thank you very much.